So talking with Keaton today about the history of tracking, and might just go back in time to, I think, what was it, 2005 that Urchin came or was bought by Google?
Yeah.
Which is where UTM parameters get the name from, right? So what happened there?
It was an easy way for servers to talk to each other without actually having to talk to each other. So someone clicks a link, and the Urchin company made this thing where you would have some information in the URL that was passed along.
Like at the end, right? After
question mark, something. It might be... An Urchin had this thing, UTM, Urchin Tracking, and Google bought that, and that's what UTM stands for.
And they roll that into Google Analytics.
It's how Google Analytics operated for years. It was really public. Like, you could see what was in there. Anyone could modify it. For a long time it worked in terms of tracking. Nowadays, a lot of browsers just chop it off.
I've noticed that with the recent Facebook.
It's not even
to get Campaign and Medium.
It's not reliable at all. There's a lot of systems. Something might be
cut it off, right?
Like URL protection for businesses, and you click a link in an email, and it will redirect first, and it might cut it off. And
so then you'll lose the tracking.
It's actually not the best way to track, but it is cookieless. Yes. But it's just clicks only. Pre-2010, it was pretty amateur, marketing, in terms of user privacy, but it worked.
Okay, so then everyone's using Google Analytics because it's free, right? As opposed to paying for these other analytics programs. So let's fast forward to cookie era, which is what? Kind of around the same time, isn't it? Or prior to that. So what
sort of, but they weren't as heavily used. So cookies did exist beforehand.
And why were they created? Like you said,
they were more for like a way that a website could interact with your browser, a way to store a bit of information. It just kind of helped with website operation. It wasn't really about marketing. And then marketers thought, we can use this heavily. Yeah. People bought entire businesses around the third-party cookie, like Criteo, for example, literally relied on that for years. People didn't think much about it, but it relied on a web browser's ability to store something which could be quite personal information.
Like a local file.
Cookies had expiry dates and things like that, but some people just abuse the system. I mean, anything that is that doesn't really have a framework to protect your privacy will definitely be abused by marketers.
Where's the name come from?
The guy likes cookies. It wasn't even about the Hansel and Gretel folk tale about crumbs in the forest. It was nothing about...
So that's like a
there's nothing. You're just like, I like cookies as cookie. Everything is done with good intentions, but a system that is made to benefit from exploiting privacy loopholes, it will be exploited. And that's why suddenly there's this push towards not letting cookies, which is your browser storing information about what you've done, to actually share it with the wrong people, things like that.
So then let's go fast forward another 5 years. In 2015, there was the first ITP or something with Apple, was there, or something?
Yeah.
It's just prior to GDPR.
Intelligent Tracking Prevention.
And this is Apple's first tiptoes into protecting their consumers' privacy.
So I think Apple did it in stages where, and look, Apple don't benefit from tracking, pervasive tracking. They're not an ad-funded company, and there's only a few web browser companies out there. There's Apple, there's Microsoft, there's Google, and then there's a few others like Mozilla, etc. And the smaller browsers that don't matter, but the big ones, most of them are ad-funded. What happened was Apple said, third-party cookies, I know a lot of websites rely on it, but we're going to limit it to 24 hours. Because people used to set the expiry date to 10 years from now, and
all the browser might delete all your cookies within 30 days, but sometimes you have to manually delete it, right? So you store this huge cache of websites.
Smart people might go, I'm going to delete my cookies and stuff. But for the majority of people, the browser did what it did. And so it was Apple's choice to make some settings where Safari would always just flush it in 24 hours.
Wow. Which should affect something if you... So the significance of that is if you advertise something and you're using cookie-based retargeting or whatever, and they bought 7 days after that, you wouldn't know, would you, based on that? Because after one day, it'd be...
People who relied on long-term decision-making, you're looking for a car or
a house.
Nothing is so short-term that you start doing the research phase and within 24 hours you buy it. It's not very much that happens with.
so Apple started to go into this privacy thing, or dipping their toes in the water. Then Europe goes pretty hard, because it was the cowboy days data in the US, right? Like anything, data brokers have gone around.
Still is.
I remember working for an app company, and if you had a mobile app, you could download your user, like there was a back-end area, we could download the database of all your app users, and it would give you the device ID, so the exact device they were using, age of it, how old they were, their name, email, phone number, like everything. So there was a lot of benefit in having mobile apps, which is that huge mobile app boom, right?
Yeah. So websites were majorly like constrained on what the web browser would share.
Exactly.
And that changed depending on what browser you were using. Yes. Whereas an app, it's made by the company that is doing the marketing to try and understand their users. So
and you know it's that person's personal device as opposed to their work computer or home computer or
like they have
whatever.
Control. So if you download a company's app,
really awesome. So we're here at a micro-brewery, having some pretty crazy beers. So it's the cowboy days of apps. So you couldn't get this information on the browser, so you go, okay, I'll create this app, or something, give it away for free, and in response I get all this crazy data.
Yeah, so web browsers share what they're built to share, but when a company makes an app, they can control exactly what they want to share. So whatever they can pull from the user's operating system, plus the user account for the app, they'll share it.
Plus the contact lists, right? So if you go, you need to install this app, and then
it's worse than that. Like, and that actually pervaded for a long time. So Apple did app tracking transparency, I think ATT. So they basically
we'll get to that in a second, but
but this contact thing was something that pervaded for long time, like 5, 6. It's only recently in the latest Apple upfronts that they stopped doing that with the contact scopes. But so they did the app tracking transparency, and that basically Apple were like, look, we know these apps are trying to share with each other, cross app sharing as well. There's just like this tracking that was just SDKs were pulling information from everywhere, and
SDK being software
development kit. Like you make a free app, you want to make some money off it, and people would make these SDKs that would give that app the ability to monetize itself. And you just put a bit of code in. But what that did is they then created these giant data broker networks of all the free apps that they were.
For example, let's give an example, like kind of like a free running app, and it would like help you find out how fast you've run and where. And you had to have the location enabled.
Yeah, and then they shared
all that
your location.
Like, they would share that data with other people who want geographic location data, right?
I know.
Like Uber Eats or something like that. Who would buy it, and then
Apple have an ecosystem they have to protect, and they're making rules. Then there's government rules to think about as well. So is location an important privacy?
But there's no legislation specifically for this because it's so complicated.
Yeah. So when you think of things like, I don't know, I should just call out companies, right? So Life360 was the app to track your children and protect them, and that was their thing. But then what happened was they got caught selling user data to data brokers about where people lived and worked and did stuff just because it was valuable data.
Then sell it to like an advertising platform who you then micro-target.
Apparently they've stopped doing it now, but would you trust that? And they recently bought Tile like a few years back, which is if you lost your keys, where is it? So the whole ecosystem, if you're in the platform and you don't set guidelines, anyone's going to abuse it. And so Apple's gone the route of, look, we'll be the parents here and we will make rules to protect users. Whereas obviously because Google make a lot of money from advertising, it's in their interest to not do that. And that is why there's a lot of talk that you're hearing about Google, but Apple actually did it beforehand, and not many people actually said anything.
So what is GDPR then? Because I know when you visit a European website, sometimes you go, can you accept all cookies? So what's all that about?
So it was made at the height of cookie usage, I would say. Like, it was such a big thing at the time because cookies were the most impacted by GDPR, along with user data, PII, and how you treat it, and data protection officers and all that sort of stuff. But cookies were majorly impacted in that people had to give it permission.
Express permission.
They obviously didn't think about what that would lead to, which is like websites with thousands of cookie pop-ups to ask you, You know,
I agree, or
and
I
it's
don't
like
agree,
most
or
people
whatever.
can't be bothered, and it's like want to hurry up. And Australia's approaching that differently, which is good. What it led to was people thought there was going to be this cookie apocalypse in Europe. In fact, like a few people did leave Europe, but what they found is like I guess a lot of people just accepted it. But also a lot of data brokers say that if you're in GDPR, that's not part of our data set as well.
Yes.
So it did affect Europe, but I think agencies there just had to do marketing a bit differently.
Oh, go back to old school.
Yeah.
Yeah, properly again.
But the rest of the world, like the West, you know, tech is in the US, the UK. We kind of, it's not English in Europe, so it's not in our vocab, in our trade press. And if someone does a marketing LinkedIn post in German, you're not going to read it, right?
No,
so
no.
like
whilst
it
it
was.
was a void of
It was sort of a
exposure.
void, yeah. So, you know, unless you were bilingual, you weren't understanding the changes.
Global company or whatever.
Yeah. Now, a lot of global websites just implemented global policies because they were in Europe, and you know that was good. But they still allowed the cookie-based activity to work everywhere outside of GDPR. The website was just built to handle GDPR.
Yeah, for both kind of things. Sure.
Yeah.
What impact did it have on tech companies, advertising platforms and stuff in Europe? Like Facebook, Meta advertising, Google advertising in Europe?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. Like when you download something that requires a database, and now they ask you to choose where you want your data stored.
Yes.
Europe or
America.
everywhere else. US mainly or somewhere else. And that's because they treat it vastly differently. So like now the companies that are global are split into two ways of working. And it leads to the question like you can actually still operate in a different way and make money, but you're still doing the old way if it doesn't live in Europe or doesn't have their data stored in Europe. One example is a lot of publishers just blocked European traffic.
Really?
If it didn't make a big part of your business,
wasn't
just
worth
block it.
complying. Okay, so that's GDPR. Then we get CCPA, so California Privacy Protection Act was like a state-based privacy thing from California, which is ironic because it's like the home of tech in San Francisco.
Yeah, I mean that's how America works. It's all state rules. But now there's not more than that. There's so many, I don't know the acronyms, but there's a lot of states now that have privacy rules and they're all different. It's such a mess. And that leads me to one point.
Yeah.
We've gone from, what did we start talking about? 2005 with Urchin. We started talking about all the things Apple did.
ITP 2015 or something, and then GDPR 2018.
ATT. Yeah, and so...
And ITP 2017.
But when all that was happening, and I've been in the industry for a long time, the industry trade press wasn't talking about it. And that's because it didn't affect Apple wasn't out there with an ad network.
No.
So it wasn't really part of the ecosystem except for the users who were now not getting exposed to retargeting, to any sort of actual targeting that was important for clients. Because the tech still worked. It was just over-indexing on Google Chrome.
Yeah, so tell me this thing. So let's go fast forward from ITP sort of happened in 2017 kind of thing with Safari, right? And then California Consumer Privacy Act, or CCPA, came in 2020. But it wasn't until this moment around 2021 where what's called ATT, which is Apple's App Tracking Transparency.
That's what I was talking about, yeah.
That came in, which with the release of iOS 14 or 14.5 or whatever. So it was kind of like Wild West. Everyone was trading data between things. You had people giving away free apps just to harvest data to then resell that and make lots of profit. Then what happened in 2021 with ATT, App Tracking Transparency? Okay, so then fast forward to 2021, for me, so we're kind of like mid-COVID. So we're kind of in the midst of COVID. Everyone's like buying shit online because they can't go outside. So it's boom times for e-commerce and DTC companies, right? Or any digital business selling stuff online. And I know a lot of budgets shifted from traditional media, offline media, to online media, namely Facebook and Google advertising platforms, which you could use to acquire new customers, this kind of thing. And right in the middle of that was the Apple App Tracking Transparency, ATT, which happened with the rollout of an iOS update, which is the operating system for Apple in 2021. iOS 14, I think it was, 14.5 to be precise. What did that mean?
If you owned an app, it meant something. Clients probably designing their own apps had to change the way they designed them and what the data they got from them was.
Why is that?
Because you could say to Apple, I don't want this app to track me, and the operating system just stopped it all, like stopped the third-party tracking.
So it was an opt-in thing, right? And
yeah.
I mean, we're going to talk to Daniel McCarthy and Brett about their thing, but really within a week or two, 90% of Apple users, or a couple of weeks, had opted into this to be excluded from being tracked. So basically 95% of all Apple
Do you want to be
iOS
tracked?
users,
No, yeah.
So, and that results in like what? Most mobile traffic is like 40 to 50% Apple iOS users, right? So there's a big chunk of tracking is now.
It's bigger in the
gone.
US, but in Australia it's pretty big. It's like 50.
So what does it mean by like you
48,
can't track though? If we had to explain what the significance of that update was.
There's a lot of things, like there's location accuracy. You can have detailed location tracking, or you can have broad location tracking, or you can have none at all.
Control your contacts as well. So some apps when you download them, they say like,
That's the latest
contact
update.
okay.
That's this year. We're in 2024.
Okay.
So I use a privacy OS on my phone, and it's had this for a while. It's called Contact Scopes, but Apple just announced it, and for years, imagine you have like 500 contacts, like you know, half the people you just meet, you add them, that's your contacts list, and you just download some free app, and you have to share something, like a meme with someone.
Like a messaging app or something.
Yeah, and it says, we need access to your contacts. And you're like, okay, and then you choose the person you want to share it with. And, But what's happened then is 300, 500 people have just been uploaded to this company that you've just wanted to share a meme with someone with, right?
Yeah.
And their name, their birthday, their email addresses, their addresses,
the calendar,
their sex,
with you, whatever.
Everything, every single thing. It's insane the amount of PII, and it is crazy how long this has taken for that simple thing to just be sort of regulated.
So the Android users still don't have this.
I still don't have it.
Okay.
No, this is only 1 year ago. 6 months ago. It's the latest iOS update, and I don't do it for TikTok, and I haven't done it for a while. I basically said to TikTok, no, you can't access my contacts. But what happens is, at a random time, every couple of days, it'll pop up and you could accidentally click yes. Because it really wants your contacts. And Meta's already got all of mine. If you're not self-aware of what's happening here,
most people aren't. They say yes. Like you give permissions to contact, location.
There's large networks of. It doesn't matter how good you are at protecting your own privacy. All your contacts are gonna leak all your data anyway. So this needed to be plugged and fixed because people were using it to build giant identity graphs in the back end. And that's what a lot of like data brokers, that's how they get their information.
Oh, this is Apple Mail privacy protection? Actually, we should talk about that
that's
next.
the contacts one.
Okay.
Apple Mail privacy protection came before that. So Apple did this thing where you're allowed to have email aliases, and it'll just generate a random email for you, and you get the email still comes to your inbox.
But I'll reroute to a secondary address.
Well, what the brand or client will see is just gibberish at Apple,
iCloud.com or whatever. Yeah.
So that protects you because they can't do data matching in the back end to know that you're also part of this service and that and here and that's privacy preserving. But cool. Then they did the contacts thing after that. So I would say iOS is now pretty locked down. But what's interesting is that once all this was happening, step by step, it wasn't in the press.
Yeah, so why is that? So why is no one talking about this stuff?
Well, they are now, but I would say it only started when Google announced the cookie depreciation.
But they've been announcing that over
even though
and over
Apple's been doing it. Yeah, so what was happening was people would invest their entire media budget into things, and they would see outcomes. They'd hit the reach. They maybe
clicks or traffic,
whatever their outcome is. No one's outcome was, I would like an even representation of browser share in the market to be reflective of my campaign. No one had that as a metric.
So what happened? Well, money moved.
It was just over-indexing to Google Chrome, Microsoft.
So instead of being representative of all the users, because you didn't know whether it was iOS or not, it would just go to Chrome to get the reach.
Yeah, and like still 50% of market share in the US is still 300 million people, right? So like people
iOS.
are still getting the reach.
But it was just over-indexing to one portion of the market.
Yeah, Chrome, because it was sharing all of the cookies. And so when we look at this and why it wasn't in the press is because it wasn't affecting anything in terms of outcomes.
So we just got some St. Louis ribs that just came to the table, which smell really good.
They look good.
Apart from that, okay, so in the interim, people really didn't maybe know the implications, so they were still going after certain metrics that would. Those workarounds or like things would default to things that probably wasn't intentional, and people didn't understand what's happening.
Yeah. So if you were doing something that wasn't targeted, then you would get Safari browsers. You'd get everyone because you weren't relying on cookies. Cookies is the problem here in this regard. And the companies that relied on cookies were still getting their reach. So now that Google said, okay, we're going to do it now, there was actually nothing else to rely on. That's why it became an issue in the market, because suddenly it's the last bastion of old school tracking.
So Google's been promising deprecation of cookie for 10 years now or something.
Yeah.
It seems like every year they push it back and back and back. It's kind of like Tesla announcing full self-driving. You just notice every couple of months it gets pushed back. But what is Google trying to do? Are they testing what it would be like without cookies and figuring out that it's not a good idea?
Well, they're based in the US.
Sure.
There's no law around cookies. I mean, GDPR affected it in terms of you need permission.
Yeah.
But there's harder laws coming down the track. And I think until they're actually forced to do something by law, either in the US or in a lot of other countries that mean a lot to them, they're not really going to do anything. Like, Google don't seem to be a leader in this way. They seem to play the political game very well.
They lag. So they only do something when they're forced to do it, basically.
Yeah. Like, you look at the Australian privacy laws that have been pushed.
Well, it's before Parliament right now, isn't it? I think it's just being gone through
this month. This month there'll be a final recommendation, but what they're saying is you need consent tracking.
What's the consent?
So data brokers need to prove how someone consented to the original usage that you're trying to use it for, and if a data broker can't prove that, then you can't use it.
We interviewed Daniel McCarthy and Brett around what impact this had. So I think the most important thing is that, okay, all this privacy stuff is being clamped down. Apple's probably leading the pack, you could say, right, on this. Google's probably lagging and promising cookies will die or whatever.
Yeah, but it will. It's just, so the problem,
what does this mean, though?
It's not really about
advertising and marketing.
It's not really much to dwell on about how it became to be that the industry kept relying on something with their head in the sand for so long.
Sure.
But before the year 2000, marketing didn't use cookies. It didn't use pervasive tracking. If you wanted to target women 24-55, you would look at the types of media they consume. You would advertise more in that media. It was really simple, actually, but it was effective because you didn't rely on tracking where these women lived.
Yeah.
You know, it's insane.
It doesn't really matter where they live.
The amount of tracking that you have is way too much for. It leads to lazy marketing.
Okay.
And so I think we've gone through that phase. Now people will start doing better marketing.
We've gone from limited targeting to then micro targeting. Right, based on all of these crazy parameters, some of which matches up and is accurate, or some of which is not.
But also you'd also, it was a fallacy. Like, you come up with an idea. Oh, I want to target this hyper niche tradies between this age who have this desire for this specific thing. You would do that, and then someone would go, "Oh, we're targeting that exact person," and it might not even be real. You know what I mean? It's just the whole industry just lapped up that because that's where the money was going, what it's led to now is the reversal. And contextual targeting is in vogue.
Which means?
Yeah, it just means the environment. Contextual can do some great stuff now, though. It can understand.
Contextual in terms of hey, I'm reading an article about art, therefore I can advertise my art auction house on a page talking about art.
Exactly. Yeah, but it could be more nuanced. It could be articles about high-end art. Boom.
Videos about high-end art.
And then when you design the message that you're talking to the person reading that. You talk to knowing that they're reading that. It just makes so much more sense.
Than trying to target users based on their demographic.
And we're going through a certain period where people would, and also, by the way, if you just do pure contextual targeting, you're going to get all those Safari browsers. You're going to get everyone else. It actually doesn't matter because you're not relying on cookies, right? So it's an even spread of everyone. As soon as you go to layer on. Okay, let's say you want to target high-end art as a contextual targeting, and you go, oh, but I only want high net worth individuals as well.
From 35 to 65,
whatever, and you've laid that on top. suddenly you introduce all the problems of cookies, like on top of your contextual.
And anything inaccuracies in that mapping is amplified.
You can't blend it. And we're going through this phase where people have their old ways and they've got their new ways, but they're sort of...
It's awkward kind of...
They're trying to blend it, and they don't understand that you shouldn't do that.
It's a different way of operating.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where we're at, I feel, today, right now. Because, like I said with some other people, there's a bit of a lag effect between when this stuff actually happens, like iOS 14, and then like it takes a year or two to go through this supply chain because everyone's kind of in denial for the first bit, right? Because they're so used to doing something one way and investing all their money in it, and all these systems and processes are built around that thing, and then to like just completely kill that and switch overnight.
Yeah, there's also sunk cost, right? Sunk cost is like it's not even about a vendor that's put their money into making a product that just relies on this way of working. It's about the systems and processes that you've put in place, but also the narrative you've put out there as an agency.
True.
We target the right customer. And if you do that and you just start doing contextual targeting, your whole...
You're not targeting customers, you're targeting content.
The whole byline of your existence of an agency just goes out the window, right? So there's all these things that need to...
Switching barriers.
Switch and change that are sort of ingrained in a little bit. It'll take a long time.
Which is why there's probably a significant lag effect. Because I remember talking about the death of growth hacking in 2020, I think, or 2019 on... Paul's podcast, My 3, and everyone was like, oh my god, I can't believe this is happening. This has been happening for like 5 years. But it's just reached this point where there's a real big inflection, and I've noticed the yields decline massively within a week. And then everyone's like, nothing can happen that quickly. And I'm like, yes it can. You can have an iOS update that kills 30% of your market within 24 hours.
What's interesting is, we'll go back to the example we talked about where it was targeting art. Let's say you were doing that. We now have large language models which are awesome at understanding what something's about.
Sure.
So I envision a future without ad fraud. And if you just advertise on a publisher, you don't get ad fraud because you've decided where you want to go. In a way, it's almost this type of contextual advertising.
It's like you're sponsoring the piece of content as opposed to trying to target the people who will read it.
Yeah. But like open market programmatic, if you're just going anywhere, targeting an audience, it didn't care what the content was. No. As long as the tech detected an audience was there.
So it's audience first targeting as opposed to...
And then people would get low CPMs, and what you would end up on is like websites that kind of had weird fake content.
MFA sites, I think they call them, made for advertising.
Yeah. But if you now try and trick a contextual model to send ads your way because you're targeting something about high-end art, then you're going to have to write a good article about that. So contextual back in the day was keywords. That's really bad. That could lead to a lot of bad places, but now it's improved a lot, and I recommend looking into it if you're not as a business. It's best to work directly with a publisher that can understand their own network because they're the ones creating the content. But if you're currently doing audience targeting, pull a browser report and look at the split between iOS. Safari versus everything else you're doing, and look at the market share in your country of those devices. You know, if you're in the US and your open market audience targeting is hitting the right people, but you're only hitting 10% Safari, well, that's the problem, right? It's in the data. You're just totally over-indexing because the tech gravitates to that.
So I think this privacy thing is, like, as we said, there's Australian legislation going, which is going to be even more harsh than GDPR at face value. We don't know. We'll go through Parliament, but it looks like there's a bit of a continuing trend, and step by step, Apple's obviously leading the way, it seems, here, but I don't see it really regressing back to the old way of happening. What is the implications for the future of advertising? We'll talk to Daniel McCarthy and stuff about meta advertising, etc., and accuracy of that, but there's been some workarounds, like there's places and attribution programs that are trying to like model the conversions that have happened in absence of this data, so they'll like estimate how many conversions you have got based on averages.
Attribution is, I want to do something where the customer doesn't know that I'm tracking them, But then I want to know specifically that they went and bought my item. It's cognitive dissonance. It's like I don't want them to know I'm tracking them, but I want to track them really heavily. I want to know exactly that worked. And so we're just going to go back to the old. If you try and work out a way around it, you're basically ignoring the reality. So yeah, you can get around it with all these ways that are probably breaking some law. Like digital is the only channel where this pervasive targeting has actually become like the norm. Like when you look at other channels, you actually have the old school way of working where it's mostly these people are here, or generally they watch this show, they over-index on that, and sure, other people also do, but you're advertising here.
Some of these attribution platforms are estimating conversions to fill in the gaps that are now we don't know about.
Well, then it's just fake data.
Yeah, exactly. I know,
that's
but
what an
it's
estimate
got a lot of people convinced. Like these things are triple whale, etc. Will think that they're filling in the data that has been lost. That's the actual selling point and headline of a lot of these
media
companies.
mix modeling or market mix modeling is a way of just not like estimating. It's to pull different levers and see what works. Sales go up. I've pulled these levers, they go down. And you're just constantly iterating, and you're running your own ship. You're comparing against yourself.
Incrementality.
There's no industry benchmarks or all that bullshit you're looking at. It's just your own business, which is great. What you're talking about though is like companies that offer a solution to the old way of working in the new era with all these things that stop
working.
The old way of working, and it's kind of snake oil, like for those people who can't think of other ways of working.
But it gives those people comfort, but it's like false comfort.
Yeah. And you can get really technical with people who say they can buy box cookies and do all this, and you can, but does it also then just break the privacy laws that are coming out?
Is it more effective than the alternative?
Like the reason Google are doing it is because the privacy laws are changing everywhere, not because they think it's a way to stop people. Of course, you can. Yeah, there are ways, and I'm not saying they don't work, but I'm just saying it's not the direction that marketing is going in.
Okay, so we're now in this era where a lot of the digital marketing platforms that are really sold on the premise of like accuracy of targeting plus efficiency and transparency of the data are now sort of broken, even though a lot of people are in denial. And I found before people change their pattern behavior, they tend to double down on things that used to work temporarily for a period of time before they realize actually that's not working. So what I've seen is like the Facebook thing in 2021 was sort of broken, and what people did was they doubled their budgets to compensate because they were losing yield. So they do more of what wasn't working as opposed to doing something different. Have you seen that as well?
I mainly play in the digital space, but I don't work for a social network. But what I do is I see market spend. I just see these ridiculous amounts going through Meta and Facebook, and it's more than normal. And especially in Australia, because it's it's come to the point where they're so over-reliant on these platforms. They don't even have creative agencies anymore. They
do everything in-house.
They use the tools that only build ads for Facebook, and they're just so used to pumping those out that they don't even know how to advertise elsewhere. They're just they're used to the tools that build ads. Like TikTok has an ad builder, and Snapchat has an ad builder, and every platform that's closed has their own ad builder. That's probably why creative agencies are suffering in a way. But if you want to advertise to people in the real world outside of Facebook, because I'm just in digital, there's a lot of publishers that now rely on Bonsai, Playground XYZ, Celtra, all these different structured systems that let you build your own ads. I don't think creative agencies even know how to build an ad from scratch anymore.
No.
But the question you were saying is like, why are people doubling or tripling their money into things that don't work? It's because it's easy. You just pull the slider to the right and more money goes in. Like, I think people are lazy. I think that's the end.
Or they don't have the alternative capability, like you said, in terms of like they've got a digital marketer, head of marketing who doesn't really know any other platforms apart from one or two. Therefore,
institutionalized. I mean, once you've had a certain way of working for 8 years,
are you going to change?
I think it takes 7 years to form a like really strong habit you can't get out of. So they've done that, and they've grown up, they've risen up the ranks, and they've become head of marketing and they're doing what they know and they actually don't know how to change.
We agree with that. I've seen that as well.
Let's say you're a startup and you built this new platform for marketing. Well, the first thing you do is you integrate with Facebook and you build your API connections, or you integrate with Google. And for a long time, like, and this is like, you've seen the whole, you know, those Lumascapes, or there's so many.
The maps
so
of
many
different MarTech vendors, whatever.
There's thousands.
But they're all come back to the same roots of the central
and I would say most of them are integrated with API connections to Meta. So the businesses, what they do is they have really easy pipes to connect, and everything else is too hard. People would say, we want to talk to members. They'll go through this expensive data syncing process and just to talk to their members about some offer, and it costs a lot of money for these systems. And then they do it and they already had the phone numbers and the email and the physical addresses of their actual members.
So why don't you just
why don't you just send them some mail?
So coming to that, actually, this is a good point we haven't talked about, is the workaround has not just been these intermediaries trying to estimate conversions and the data that's now no one has access to, it's anonymous, but there have been these like clean room workarounds. So CAPI, or Conversion API, has been Facebook's or Meta's workaround around filling in the missing data. So they will compare your database of users or customers to their central database, which is massive, and anonymously attribute anyone who has been a Facebook user to the conversions that you're, quote, missing. Problem being is that most people in the world have a Facebook account, right? Therefore, they can attribute anything that isn't always a direct result of an ad. But that's been CAPI. There's been other workarounds like data clean rooms, where you can share your anonymous data with their database and sort of match it up anonymously. Therefore, you're not sharing explicit data.
Yeah, and there's that thing where it comes to consent, right? So there's the tech that does it, and then there's the person at that you're actually their details you're moving around. Did they consent to that even to start with? Like, I'm an advocate for consumers and I work in advertising. It's really I think you can have both at the same time, but also a lot of people have cottoned on to marketing and spam and so it's really bad in Australia. You can't have really easy burner phone numbers, but you can have different emails. So a lot of people at least have 2 emails. That's like the bare minimum.
Like a personal or work or whatever.
So they'll have a spammy email where they sign up for newsletters and spammy stuff, and then they'll have a different email for their bank. And so I would put a bet on most of Facebook's emails being the spam email. So when you try and do a data match, they're different emails. And so I would say Facebook's probably only good at matching with other spammy emails, if they got that. And this is the thing about a clean room, is like, you need to have a data set that matches your data set, right? Phone numbers is sort of the key. And a lot of businesses use phone numbers of 2FA under the guise of security, but they're actually using it to harvest your data.
To fill in the gap.
And 2FA is actually just a proxy for who are you. Because to get a phone number, at least in Australia, you need a ID. A government issued ID. So instead of having the business have to subscribe to an ID verification service, they just go, we'll text you a number and your 2FA.
And they go find something.
And it's a proxy for ID. And that's why when the government announced the Australian Digital ID service, people were going, no, that's not good. But it actually removes the phone number as a proxy and protects you more, because your number's not out there. And the government, whatever service it will say, is this person real or not? Yes, they are. Okay.
So where is this heading in the future then? We're at 2024, but what's going to happen, do you think, after this? You think it's going to get worse?
No. So this is the reason I brought up ideas. I've been speaking to a few heads of media at agencies, and they say on the side, like, I think there'll be a government-issued ID soon that's mandatory,
almost,
just to have access to the internet for protection, to log into your bank, to do these sort of things. Where does it lead to marketing? If I look at 5 years' time, what we're going to have is an industry that...
Everyone's wearing Vision Pro, number one, right? VR and the headsets that walk around.
No, look, people like to talk about AI a lot.
Oh.
I think there will be tools that intelligently understand the content of the page.
Yep.
And
or
can
website, video, program, whatever.
Yeah, and can much better talk about what's
Who's
on the
best.
page.
Yes.
It's not who. I mean, if I'm researching makeup for my wife's birthday, then there should be a makeup ad. But at the moment, at that specific point in time, I'm looking at makeup.
Really?
And so I think contextual is strong in a way that reflects the behaviour of whatever the person is.
Cool.
So that's 5 years. I think there's going to be like a push towards understanding the page. In 10 years' time, I think universal advertising will become easier. I think a lot of accounts will come out of global management from Singapore or New York or whatever, and they will make ads that will intelligently shapeshift to the culture and the language that is needed at the point in time. And so you'll have one message that's a global strategy, and it will shift. It will change the language. It will change the art style. You know, if it's in Asia, the people will be maybe Asian looking. In Africa, they might be African looking. And so the ads will shapeshift depending on the environment. And so 10 years time, I see a lot less accounts being run locally, which is actually something I haven't actually seen online. But let's go back to that in 10 years.
Cool. Sounds good. Okay, thanks, Keaton.